Midnight
Hey,
in
you!
Riverside
Step out of the
wasn't
car
quiet.
now!
It pulsed with a tension that every woman of color behind the wheel could feel. The kind of tension that came not from the shadows of crime, but from the glare of red and blue lights flashing in a rearview mirror. For years, Sergeant Travis Cole had worked these streets like they belonged to him. 17 years in uniform had taught him one truth. The badge on his chest didn't just protect the city, it protected him. Protected him when he stopped drivers for no reason. Protected him when he wrote up tickets based on lies. Protected him when he leaned into a window, voice low and menacing, and suggested that a little cash might make a big problem go away. And when that didn't work, the badge protected him when he brought them to court, because the system always took his word. His paperwork was neat, his testimony sharp. No one ever questioned him. He was the law, and the law was always on his side. That's what he thought the night he pulled over the wrong woman. The woman he believed was just another late-night target, another driver who would crumble under the weight of his authority. The woman he believed he could drag into his game of fabricated violations and walk away clean. What he didn't know was that the woman behind the wheel wasn't just any driver. She was the one who had come to end the game. Captain Simone Grant had spent her career fighting rot from within. When the city of Riverside called her in, it wasn't to shuffle papers or pose for cameras. It was to clean house. She'd read the reports, she'd seen the patterns. Too many stops, too many women, too many stories that sounded the same. And one name that kept appearing, Sergeant Travis Cole. But Simone wasn't interested in rumors. She wanted facts. She wanted proof. And she knew where to find it on the streets, where it happened, in the dark corners where power was abused and the badge became a weapon. So she drove. No uniform, no escort, just her and the dashcam recording every second. The cruiser appeared behind her, right on cue. The siren's bark cut through the night. The lights lit up the empty road. Simone pulled over, calm, controlled, every move deliberate. She'd trained officers on how to handle stops like this. Now she was living it. The footsteps came, heavy and confident. The flashlight blinded her for a second before locking onto her face. License and registration. You were drifting between lanes, Cole said, voice sharp, no hint of courtesy. Simone handed over the documents. Officer, can you explain the reason for this stop? She asked. Steady as stone. Cole smirked, already deciding how this would go. I'm seeing signs of impairment. I could take you in right now. But maybe we can handle this a different way. He glanced at the dash, expecting a wallet to appear, a bribe to be offered. Instead, Simone's hands stayed where they were, still, controlled, not playing along. Cole didn't back down. He'd done this too many times. He wrote the citation. He checked every box that would hold up in court. Failure to maintain lane. Suspected DUI non-compliance. He crafted the story on paper like he always did, certain that no one would question it, that when the case hit court, his word would crush hers. That's how it always went. The badge made sure of that, and he didn't see it the way she watched him, the way she let him dig his own grave, one checkmark at a time. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Simone wasn't just preparing to fight the ticket. She was preparing to tear down the lie. She wasn't going to pay. She wasn't going to settle. She wasn't going to let it slide. She was going to court not as a victim, but as the storm that would finally strip away the shield he thought made him untouchable. And the papers he so confidently handed her that night, they weren't his protection. They were the rope he'd handed her to pull the truth out into the light. Because this time, when he brought a woman to court, she wasn't the one on trial. He was. The road was empty, except for the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows. Across cracked asphalt, Captain Simone Grant gripped the steering wheel of her sedan, the steady hum of the engine the only sound inside the cabin. Her eyes scanned the mirrors, watching. She wasn't out here tonight by accident. This was the stretch of road where too many stories had started the same way. Late-night traffic stops, fabricated infractions, women too tired or too scared to fight back. And always, the same name stamped at the bottom of those citations, Travis Cole. Simone had reviewed every complaint that crossed her desk in her first 2 weeks on the job. She had memorized the patterns, the dates, the times, and the tactics. The stops came mostly at night, on empty roads, always targeting women who looked like her. Women who Cole assumed had no power, no voice. But tonight, the script was about to change. Because Simone wasn't out here as a target. She was out here as the test. He didn't know he was about to fail. In the rearview mirror, headlights appeared. They stayed back at first, pacing her, watching. Simone felt the weight of the gaze behind those lights, before the siren barked, before the flash of red and blue. She didn't flinch. She pulled over smoothly, engine off, hands at 10 and 2. The training she'd given others, she followed it now herself, not out of fear, but out of precision. Every move recorded, every detail accounted for. The patrol car stopped. The door slammed. Heavy boots crunched gravel, and then he was there. Travis Cole, the man she'd read about in files, heard about in whispered conversations at roll call. His presence was as aggressive as the complaints had described. Shoulders squared, chin up, one hand resting near his belt, fingers inches from his holstered gun. The flashlight hit her windshield, swept across the dash, paused on her face. He didn't greet her, didn't ask if she was all right. His voice was flat, demanding. License and registration. You were drifting between lanes. Simone moved, deliberately, slow enough to show she was no threat, fast enough to show she wasn't intimidated. Officer, she said, handing over the documents, could you clarify what you observed that led to this? Stop. Her voice was calm, professional, the kind of voice that didn't fit the mold Cole was used to dealing with at this hour. Cole didn't answer her question. His smirk told her everything. He thought this was easy. Another citation, another fine, another driver who'd either pay at the curb or get dragged into court and ground down by paperwork and procedure. I'm seeing signs of impairment, he said, stepping closer, the flashlight now squarely in her eyes. I'm thinking I should bring you in, unless maybe you want to take care of this another way. There it was, the moment he'd fallen into his own trap. Simone didn't look away, didn't blink. Her heart rate stayed steady. Inside, she felt the gravity of the moment, the confirmation of everything she suspected. The words she'd heard, reported by others, were now aimed at her. But outside, she stayed still. You're issuing a citation, then? She asked, voice level, unshaken. Cole hesitated for half a beat, surprised she hadn't taken the bait. But his ego wouldn't let him back down. He pulled out his pad, scribbled the citation, checked the boxes that would bolster his story. Failure to maintain lane, suspected DUI, non-compliance. His handwriting quick, practiced, his assumptions absolute. This was what power looked like. In his mind, the badge, the pen, the system behind him. As he tore the ticket free and handed it through the window, Simone accepted it without a word. She glanced at it, noting every detail, every falsehood. She didn't argue, she didn't protest, because she didn't need to. The real evidence was already recorded, the footage from her dashcam, the audio from her discreet body mic, the damning certainty in his tone, his actions, his choices. Cole stepped back, watching her, waiting for a reaction that didn't come. The silence unnerved him in a way no protest ever had. He cleared his throat, tried to reassert his control. Be sure to take care of that in court, he said, as if the outcome was a foregone conclusion, as if the system would, as always, back him without question. Simone started the engine, her gaze meeting his one last time, and for a flicker of a second, something passed between them. Not recognition, not yet, but the uneasy feeling of a man who sensed, at the edge of his arrogance, that something about this stop hadn't gone the way he planned. She drove off, steady, precise, watching him shrink in her mirror. Cole stood there, ticket book in hand, convinced he'd done his job. Convinced that whatever complaint might follow would hit the same dead end as all the others. But this time, the complaint wouldn't disappear into a file. This time, it would lead straight to a courtroom. And for the first time in his career, Cole wasn't going to be the one holding the pen, writing the ending. This time, he was about to face the wrong woman on the right side of the law. The ticket sat on her desk like a challenge. Captain Simone Grant stared at it. The neatly printed falsehoods lined up like the bars of a cage. Sergeant Travis Cole thought he'd built around her. Failure to maintain lane. Suspected DUI. Not. It was a script he had written many times, a script he trusted to do what it always did: silence the accused, grind them down in the machinery of the courts, force them to pay up, shut up, and disappear. But this time, his script had been handed to the wrong woman. Simone didn't crumble. She didn't rage. She didn't even tear up the ticket. She filed it, logged it, studied it, because this was no longer just about her. This was about every woman who'd been forced to swallow their pride, Every voice that had been dismissed under the weight of a badge used as a weapon. Cole had thought he was dragging another victim into court. He didn't realize he was dragging himself into the fight that would end his game for good. Simone's first call was to the city's legal department. She didn't ask for favors, she asked for process. A formal civil rights complaint, a demand for an independent review. She handed over the dashcam footage, the audio recordings, the citation, every piece lined up to show what Cole had done, not just that night, but as part of a pattern too long ignored. And then she called her own attorney, a quiet, relentless litigator named Marcus Shaw, known for dismantling lies in the courtroom with surgical precision. Together, they mapped out the next steps. Simone wasn't looking for a settlement. She wasn't looking for headlines. She was looking for accountability, on the record, in front of a judge, where Cole could no longer hide behind the shield of his badge or the comfort of a system that had always covered for him. Cole, meanwhile, heard about the complaint within days. At first, he laughed it off. Another angry driver, another case that would get tied up in procedure, until it fizzled out. He told his buddies at the station the same lines he always did. She caved before it gets to court, they always do. But there was a crack in his confidence. The paperwork had come through too fast. The city wasn't brushing this aside. The department wasn't shielding him like before. There were whispers now. Whispers that the new captain was involved. That this wasn't just some citizen with a grudge, but Cole doubled down. His pride wouldn't let him back away. If anything, the thought of court gave him a stage to perform on, a place to tell his version, to play the role of the veteran cop just doing his job against a world too soft to understand the street. The court date came faster than he expected. The case hadn't stalled. It had gathered momentum. Local news started sniffing around. A decorated police captain filing a civil rights suit against her own officer wasn't a story that could stay quiet for long. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to taste. Simone sat at the plaintiff's table, composed in her uniform, her decorations understated but impossible to ignore. Marcus Shaw beside her, calm, methodical, a man who let facts do the heavy lifting. Across from them, Cole sat stiff, his lawyer whispering strategies he no longer fully believed. The judge, an experienced jurist named Cynthia Morales, took the bench with a gravity that signaled this wasn't just another traffic dispute. This was about power, abuse, truth. The prosecution laid out the case with brutal clarity. The dashcam video played, showing Simone's steady driving, the flawless lane discipline. The audio recordings filled the room with Cole's own voices, accusations without cause, his thinly veiled suggestions of handling it another way, his smug confidence that no one would stop him. The citation was dissected, point by point. Every false claim exposed against the backdrop of video evidence that told a very different story. Marcus Shaw's questions were simple, direct, impossible to dodge. "Sergeant Cole, can you point to any evidence of intoxication?" Cole floundered. "Did the defendant resist your orders in any way?" Again, no real answer. "Would you have acted differently had you known she was your commanding officer?" The pause said everything. The reluctant admission sealed it. Yes, Cole's lawyer tried to pivot, tried to argue discretion, officer's safety, split-second decisions, but the evidence was relentless. The truth was relentless. Simone's testimony was steady, precise. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The facts spoke louder than outrage ever could. She described the stop as it happened, her training, her choices, her restraint. She described what it meant to be on the receiving end of power, used not to protect, but to control. And she described why she brought this to court, not for vengeance, but for change. The gallery was packed. Officers from the department, city officials, citizens who'd followed the headlines. The silence in the room was the kind that followed a storm, the kind that waited for judgment, the kind that marked the end of pretending everything was fine. Cole felt it then, in the weight of that silence. He felt it in the way people looked at him, not with respect, not with fear, but with disappointment. The badge he thought made him untouchable was now just metal on his chest, stripped of the power he'd abused. When the verdict came, it wasn't dramatic. No gasps, no shouts, just the clean, final words of accountability. The court found in favor of Simone Grant. The citation ruled fraudulent. Cole found to have violated civil rights. Damages awarded. Recommendations for internal reviews sent to the department, the city, the DOJ. And with that, the game Cole had played for years was over, not with a bang, not with a fight, but with the simple, undeniable weight of truth, and the knowledge that, this time, he'd dragged the wrong woman to court and lost everything because of it. The courtroom was heavy with expectation as the final phase of the trial began. The part where words would no longer shield Travis Cole from what he had done. The part where the truth, undeniable and public, would do what years of whispered complaints and buried reports had failed to accomplish. The part where he would finally be seen, not as the enforcer of the law, but as its betrayer. The part where the badge he clung to so tightly became nothing more than cold metal pinned to a hollow uniform. Captain Simone Grant sat upright, composed, the weight of the moment not lost on her. She hadn't come for victory laps. She hadn't come for applause. She had come for this, the quiet, final stripping away of the illusion Cole had wrapped himself in for too long. Her attorney, Marcus Shaw, rose with the kind of calm that made people lean in, not because he spoke loudly, but because he didn't need to. The evidence had already been laid bare. Now came the reckoning. On the projector, the dashcam footage played once more, frame by frame, the car steady in its lane, no swerving, no erratic movement, just a driver going home, as so many had done before they were pulled into Cole's trap. The audio followed, and with it, the courtroom heard again Cole's voice, sharp, sure, weaponized authority in every word. "You were drifting. I'm seeing signs of impairment. Maybe we can handle this another way." His own tone betrayed him. His own words cornered him. The video paused on his face, lit by the flashlight beam as he leaned into Simone's window. The smirk of a man who believed the outcome was already written. A man who believed he couldn't be touched. The silence in the room was suffocating. Not because it was empty, but because it was full of the weight of what had been proven. Full of the shift in power that had finally come. Shaw turned to Cole on the stand, his voice low, steady, the kind that left no room for escape. "Sergeant Cole, do you see any indication in this footage that the defendant was impaired?" Cole's throat worked, but no sound came at first. When he did speak, the arrogance had drained from him. "No." The word landed like a gavel. "Sergeant Cole, would you have handled this stop differently if you had known who she was?" The question hung there, daring him to lie. He hesitated, too long for comfort. Yes, it was quiet, it was honest, and it was damning, because with that one word, he admitted that the rules he claimed to uphold were flexible for him, flexible, depending on who was watching, who was in the driver's seat, who might have the power to hold him accountable. Shaw stepped back. There was nothing more to say. The truth had done its work. The judge turned to the jury, and the verdict came swift, unshaken by Cole's years of authority or reputation. Guilty of violating civil rights, guilty of submitting false reports. The damages were awarded. The recommendations for further review were ordered. But more than that, the illusion was shattered. The badge that had shielded Cole for so long was now the very thing that marked his fall. As the room emptied, Cole sat alone at the defense table, the hum of whispers filling the space where his confidence had once been. He stared at his hands, at the badge that no longer protected him, at the future he'd gambled and lost. And across the room, Simone gathered her files, her uniform as crisp as it had been that night on the road, her resolve as firm. She had come not to destroy, but to expose. And now, with the truth laid bare, she turned and walked out not as a victor, but as a reminder that power without accountability is nothing more than a mask. And that this time, when Travis Cole brought a woman to court, he'd brought the wrong one. The verdict didn't echo through the city with loud headlines or breaking news banners. It moved like a ripple, quiet, steady, unstoppable. Within hours, the department issued a statement, carefully worded, acknowledging the judgment, promising a full review of policies and procedures. But behind those words, the reality was far less polished. The whispers in the station house turned to pointed stares. The officers who once nodded to Cole with respect now avoided his gaze. The badge he'd worn like armor felt heavier by the day, stripped of the protection he had believed was his by right, not by duty. Cole was placed on administrative leave while the internal review unfolded. But everyone knew what that meant. His career wasn't on pause. It was over. The illusion he'd built for 17 years that the badge made him untouchable, that the system would always cover for him, had shattered. And what stung the most wasn't the suspension or the inevitable termination. It was the knowledge that it had been his own arrogance, his own choices, that had led him here. The badge hadn't failed him. He had failed it. Captain Simone Grant returned to her duties without fanfare. She wasn't interested in interviews or accolades. The courtroom victory wasn't the end of her mission. It was just one step. She met with department leadership, laid out plans for new training on civil rights, traffic stop procedures, and implicit bias. She pushed for an overhaul of the complaint review process, ensuring that no voice would be ignored again simply because it came from someone the system had failed to respect. And she made sure the record of the trial, the evidence, the testimony, every piece of truth that had come to light, became required reading for every new recruit who walked through the doors of the academy. At community meetings, Simone spoke plainly, without promises she couldn't keep, but with the kind of resolve that rebuilt trust one brick at a time. We can't erase the past, she told them, but we can choose what comes next, and that choice starts here, with all of us. The faces in the crowd, skeptical at first, began to change. The same streets that had once felt like traps, after dark started to feel different, not overnight, not completely, but different. The weight of silence that had protected injustice had been broken. And what of the message? The message was this: power without accountability is hollow. A badge, a uniform, a title, these are not shields to hide behind. They are responsibilities to live up to, every hour, every decision, every encounter. Simone had proven that. She had stood where so many had been forced to bow. She had shown that courage doesn't always mean raising your voice. Sometimes it means standing firm, documenting the truth, and letting the facts speak louder than anger ever could. For Travis Cole, the lesson came too late, but for the city, for the department, for every officer who watched the trial unfold, for every citizen who had wondered if speaking up was worth it, the impact was clear. One woman's refusal to back down had shifted the ground beneath their feet. The system hadn't saved itself. It had been challenged, forced to face itself in the mirror of the law. And in that mirror, it had seen both the rot and the path forward. Because when Cole brought Simone Grant to court, he believed he was bringing a mark, a target, another voice to silence. Instead, he brought himself to justice. And that truth, simple and unshakable, would outlast the verdict, the headlines, even the memory of the trial. It would remain as a warning and a promise that no badge makes anyone untouchable, and that sometimes it only takes one person, in the right place, at the right time, to remind the world what justice is supposed to look like.